Good evening, everyone. We are now in the penultimate week of this online teachers course, which the Calcutta Research Group is conducting in partnership with the Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung and the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna. Today's lecture, titled Migrant Workers and the Labor of Remittance, will be delivered by Professor Hari Sharma of the Social Science Baha in Kathmandu, Nepal. He is amongst us now. He's a dear friend of CRG and we extend to him a very warm welcome. I will read a few formal words of introduction about Professor Hari Sharma and then request him to deliver the lecture. Professor Hari Sharma has served in academia and government in various capacities. He has 15 years of teaching experience in various academic institutions, including Tribhuvan University, the Kathmandu College of Management, and Kathmandu University. He has a bachelor's degree in political science from Punjab University and a master's degree in political science from Tribhuvan University, Nepal. He was a Fulbright scholar at Cornell University in the United States. He has co-authored 2 books, Political Leadership in Nepal and Local Leadership in Nepal. He regularly contributes to Nepal's national dailies and television debates, including a fortnightly book discussion column in Setopati. He served as Principal Secretary to Prime Minister Girija Prasad Koirala during 1991 to 93, 1997 to 98, and 1999 to 2001. He was also the political and foreign policy advisor to Dr. Ram Baran Yadav, the first president of the Republic of Nepal. He was a consultant on cabinet process reforms to Afghanistan's Office of Administrative Affairs and Office of the President in 2006-2007. He was also an advisor to the Nepal Trade Union Congress from 1991 to 2000. Professor Hari Sharma, will you please deliver your lecture? Thanks.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be participating in CRG's various programs, including this one in a migration. And I am told that many of you are teaching in the colleges and the universities and have some interest or specific interest in the migrations. CRG is a premier institution, I need not to tell you, in whole of South Asia, working on forced migration, urbanization, various political and social economic issues confronting us. And the most commendable work in the recent time has been pandemic and its impact on the life of the work. That means including workers in its subcontinent. So it's my pleasure. I don't claim to be myself an expert on a migration, but someone who has been, crisscrossing between, activist world and the policy world. I would like to share some of my observations, which would be useful for your academic understanding. I have sent 3 reading materials for the purpose of this, not exactly for this lecture, the kind of thing that will be more broad, generic type. But I would first speak a little bit on the kind of the readings from Nepal that I wanted to share with you. The first one is a David Seddon and Ganesh Gurung and Jagannath Adhikari, the 1998, which gives you a kind of broader picture of a migration in Nepal, how the issues of migration, why it is so important for Nepali state and Nepali people. The second article is the destination countries, that where do people go to migration, and one of the unfortunate the area that most of the people who work on migration in Nepal don't study the migration to India for some political reason, some political constraints, and the data constraints. Because 1950 treaty makes that both countries will treat their citizens as in a reciprocal basis, Uh, in whole of South Asia, Nepal and India shares the open border where you don't need a basic document to cross the border. It's open border, not even regulated border for that matter. Forget about passports and other things. You may require passport when you travel by air, but if you travel by land, there are around 22 border crossings between India and Nepal. Then you don't need a passport. The special treaty of 1950 allows both the citizens of country to enjoy similar rights in paper, but it's still a difficult proposition. So for that matter, how many Nepalese are working in India, how many Indians are working in Nepal is still not properly calculated. Maybe some data are there, but both the countries don't want to touch that data because it's a politically very sensitive in a way that Nepal being a small country, always more workers from India seem to be something not desirable. At the same time, India offers a vast opportunity for Nepali people, and then they are employed in a very sensitive security areas, also from Indian Army to various security sector, plus household security guards, even the menial work that many Nepalese does. Plus, Nepali migration in India is also not studied properly because of the dual identity, the who is Nepali and who is Gorkhali. Especially in India, the Gorkha identity has the imperial linkages or colonial linkages, and people have moved on the various times of our history to settle there or be there for more than 100 years or more or beyond that. So these people, for the sake of kind of separate identity, not to tie it up with the homeland in Nepal, Gorkha identity. And then most of the Darjeeling, Assam, even in Myanmar, we have a sizable Nepali speaking population which would like to identify themselves as a Gorkhali identity or Gorkha identity. That means, who is a Nepali, who is a Gorkhali. It's all, again, they speak the same language. Most of them has a kind of origin in the hills of Nepal, so plains of Nepal, in the state of Nepal. But they have been there for many centuries, more than 100 years, 150 years. So that also creates the tension. So I think studying who is Nepali migrant, who is a worker in India, so that's a kind of quite sensitive and political issues. Therefore, the one of the least studies is the Nepali migration in India or Indian migration in Nepal. Therefore, whenever you turn the pages of the, find a research, want to do a research on Nepal, migration studies in Nepal, or the outward migration especially, you will find the mostly migrations that has been Gulf countries and the Malaysia and Japan and Korea as a worker. No doubt there are sizable number in US in recent time, especially after 80s and 1990s when passport regime was loosened up in Nepal. Because of the globalization, travel has become much easier. The work has opened up, so you find first generations Nepalese in the US. But in UK, there's again the Gorkha connections, the army connection is there. So at one level, whenever you find the migration, outward migration of Nepali workers or Nepali people involved in a work outside the territory of Nepal, the Gorkha category is a valorized category. It's a basically bravery associated with the empire, earlier state empire building, or earlier colonial history. Whereas the Nepali migration is always, it's an irony that I always say myself, because someone who was also raised in a army cantonment, my father, my grandfather also served in a British army or Indian army for that matter. I'm always torn between two identities. One is a valorized Gorkha identity, Gorkha is always powerful, brave, serving in the frontiers, working in the frontiers, and that kind of thing. But Nepali identity is a poor, developing country, hills, and then poor Nepali is the another pauperized Nepali, valorized Gorkhali and pauperized Nepali. So what you find is in a migration literature, a globalization literature, in colonial literature, you will find the Nepalis serving in a various army, especially starting with the Ranjit Singh's army, later with the after 1857 Sipai. First War of Independence or mutiny, whichever you like to call it, Gorkha soldiers were also used by the Britishers to suppress the First War of Independence or mutiny, for that matter. So one strand of the Gorkha identity and its outward mobility is always associated with the British Empire. But when I look more carefully, and there are some studies you find is that people going to another global capitalist commodity is a tea, and lost a lot of the tea gardens in the northeast and Assam have been run around the command system, which was basically colonial enterprise of setting up a tea garden, and it's a perfectly ran in terms of your militaristic or hierarchical manner. Therefore, you always, whenever you hear about the tea garden, it's a command, tea command, and the people to work on this the command were taken from the plains of Bihar, Santhal Parganas, and those areas, and Nepalis from them. So before army outward migration, I think most of the people that went from Nepal to work in Indian tea gardens, and the tea garden began in the earlier colonial periods in India. So in that sense, whenever we talk about Nepali outward migration, we always see connect it with the militaristic, the able-bodied men from the hills, around the martial class idea and that kind of thing. But in fact, you also find in the area. Again, another migration in northeast, basically Assam, in the slash and burn agriculture, animal husbandry, organized agriculture sector. Therefore, if you read any history of Assam's political consciousness, in earlier phase, a lot of Nepalis also contributed in building agriculture society in Assam, and then political society also. So there's that strand which has not been studied properly in the tea gardens. I think there are some studies coming up, but not in terms of the early settlers during the colonial periods for animal husbandry, agriculture thing. So that's one strand. But recently, our imagination, when we say migrations, migrant workers, remittance, is from, if you look from the Nepal's research perspective, many people are fascinated with the Gulf, Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Malaysia, to some extent Japan, and to some extent the Korea. Rarely the migrant workers in US is not touched upon because generally people who go to the developed countries or first world countries, it's a different economic categories, and nobody would like to call them a migrant worker. So migrant worker, a study of migration also is a very hierarchical understanding. Who goes where, in what kind of skills? Migrant workers were always kind of looked down even from the societal thing. It's a very dangerous. Someone who has worked in the trade union movements and thing, I find is a very problematic. And I just wanted to, who cares for the migrant workers? Migrant workers are always pushed around, subjugated, tortured, harassed. So that kind of thing. So unfortunately, we also feel that way in Nepal. 28% of the GDP comes from the external remittance supported by the migrant workers, but migrant workers' dignity is never considered in a proper light. So there's one part And then why I'm bringing this different categories for you to contemplate and think is that generally, whenever we say migrant workers, migrations, who goes where is a very important. Who can afford to go there? For example, who can go to we can afford to go to first world Europe or America? They've been treated differently in their home countries. Their prestige, their many of you, the very international group in this cohort, but Bengalis must understand Bilik Fira, the someone who came from Belayat. Now in a Hindi movies, someone does not come from Belayat, he comes from America. So where does they come from? What kind of aura, what kind of prestige that brings? The point that I'm referring you is that we need to be, whenever we talk about migration, where one can afford to go, where one is forced to go in that sense, or voluntarily or pushed in that sort of thing. Where is the fascination or imagination lies with these people who travel too far off to earn the livelihood, and what kind of money and remittance they money is ultimately colorless. Money is money, but again, if you send pounds and dollars, and if you send dirhams or yen, and then in a societal prestige. And I think the people who come from economics, they would only look into the financial part, how much of a GDP, how much of it. So in my 3 readings that I supported is basically what money means in terms of, there's an article, Money and Blood, Remittance as a Substance of Relatedness in a Transnational Families. This is a very interesting article that I wanted to. How does remittance money, not only economic livelihood, but how families are reinvented and created, what kind of relationships. So I was trying to bring in a kind of interdisciplinary reading to all of you. And I think the Yamnaka's 2001 article that Social Science Baha has published, Nepali migration in Japan and Korea, also who goes to Japan, what kind of regulations are there. So that also determines the attractiveness or the even in this pandemic, who is treated properly when they go out. What kind of politics or policies of receiving countries determines the thing. So there are 3 articles that speaks different kind of approach to look into the migration, and I'm quite fascinated with the social dislocation that the migration has created in our many societies. We have seen great dislocation and displacement during the pandemic, when Modi suddenly gave 4 hours for millions of migrant workers to leave their places and go back to their villages. We have seen that horrific picture in the television, and what kind of impact that may have had in the children's, the families, the expectations, whether these people have returned back to their work or not. Who cares for migrant workers? What kind of policies are required? I think that is a very illustrative of our time. The Ranveer Da and the colleagues in the CRG has done great work in terms of migrations and state. Who cares for these people? Who speaks for these people? Because before pandemic, before they came to television screen, nobody thought about these migrant workers. We always thought that sending money home and then is important thing, and money went to their home and livelihood was ensured to some extent to their respective family, but nobody talked about kind of discriminations, kind of invisibility these people were suffering, and so suddenly they became visible. But I think politics as usual, economy as usual, I think people have started forgetting these people. I think this kind of work and research is a very important. Looking at Nepal's perspective, I would see that because of the external migration, yes, remittance has played a big role in Nepali villages, remote areas, even state coffers. As I said, 28% of the GDP at present is contributed by remittance. But it has also created dislocations. It has also started, people are moving out of the villages to the semi-urban areas, and unplanned, not unplanned, uncontrolled migrations to the semi-urban areas for the for better education, better services, have been met with the severe difficulties. Um, and then the social relations are reproduced, strengthened. I think the article that Jakarevich and others have, which I've shared with you, the remittance money not only important for livelihood, but creating the family structures, is a very interesting illustrative anthropological look into central hills of Nepal. And I would like you to read that properly and think about what kind of dislocations and um, um, uh, changes that are bringing into family structure because of the migrations and the money associated with it. Because we have seen a lot of folk tales and music songs of a longings. For example, I'm very fond of the UP's Malini. There was some singer who sings about her husband going to the urban areas for a job, and she longs for a relations coming back and relationship. There's never mention about kind of the benefits or downside. It's a basically human relation, we see it. But there are a lot of musics that we in a folk musics in the villages, we see the men folk going to the urban areas or this long distance land, and there's the relationship, longing, belonging, that thing come into the picture. But in terms of ethnography, this particular ethnography is quite illustrative, because whenever somebody sends money from abroad or India for that matter, um, there is a special preferences, because the male folk, generally male folk, go out and they need to sustain the family, recently married. They may have a children because they come for short term, and they need to sustain the family. And suddenly, the remittance has also led to nuclearization of a family. Instead of supporting whole family, the principal bread earners commitment to particular his wife and children is a very male dominated world. External migration is a very much male dominated. From Nepal, there are some study on women migration, basically in a care industry. In Israel and Kuwait, in the elderly care home, there are also ethnographies coming in, but traditionally migrant workers is a very male dominated world, and the kind of support that they do, and the family relationships, transnational family relationships, are kind of transitional family structures are changing. So it's a very important area of work. There's one Laura Arendt's work on the letters between migrant worker and their family, especially young wife. A lot of the letters are published, and it has also given the dynamics of relationship, conjugal relationship, raising children, families, this thing. Why I'm bringing this human side of the story, what seems to be very soft side of the story, look compared to the money and bigger political economy, is because it is creating different kind of social relationship in our rural areas. The other day, I was talking to the district judge in the Dhanusha district, where he was telling me, and I could send that. There's a couple of stories published recently also, but not properly studied. But it has shown that generally, when young men folk go to Gulf countries or Malaysia, and they send money back to their wife and children, and suddenly when they come home, and family dislocation takes place. There's a lot of divorce case filed by the men who have gone work and come back and not finding anything. It's a very strange social relations is unfolding. Change of social relation, power relationship is changing. These are small numbers, but in a Kathmandu district court other day, we always thought that the women folks staying at home or women going abroad, what kind of family structures are changing. So it's a new data is emerging. It's not consolidated yet. So what I'm saying, hinting at, is that the family structure, the nuclear family, the joint families, the family structures are undergoing big changes. The preliminary indications are such. So one of these articles also talks from the Kham area, which is the origin of Maoist area, and it's empirical ethnographic work that would give you what kind of social changes are taking place in this because of the migrations, because of the people going out for work. We have seen enough that people who go out, they bring ideas. The earlier times in the 19th century, with the travels, going abroad, going outside of the your village or community, you brought new ideas. You brought technologies, which also led to the various changes, the way we look at the family, community, and society, even nation for that matter. I think these kind of empirical work on the impact of the family structure, on the ideas, on communities has not been done because of the capitalism, neoliberal capitalism. Money has become very important work for us. Monetary issues have become very important, how much it contributes in national economy. So I think problematizing money and remittance is going to be very important, and other side of the work. To understand the dynamics of our migrations and the associated the resources that it generates. We don't look into what kind of knowledge and skill it brings in. We generally tend to look into the fiscal side of it or the monetary side of it. So I would like you to, this is a course. When Nepal is in hill areas, the migration is always seen as the ultimate desire for any able-bodied men, be it in the army, like a valorized Gorkhali, or going out or bringing resources to your villages or your family is a prestigious thing to do, because migration in a Nepali culture or hill culture is always there. And the west to east migration was always there in terms of human civilization. If you look into Hindu Kush areas, so if somebody wants to go out of your villages, or cities or town, you were always seen doing some udyog, means you were industrious, you were hardworking, because one is a romanticization with the martial tradition of an army. The other is you bring much needed resources, because in hilly areas, whenever we say Nepal, there's a plain also, but migration is a very dominant migration culture is a very dominant in hill areas. But recent studies have shown that the plains, because of the Nepali state's unequal investment in terms of politics and the economy, hill areas, plain areas also, because of our bordering areas, which is with the Indo-Gangetic plain, the plain people were all seen with the suspicion. Contrary to India, hill is poor, plain is powerful. But in Nepal, the hill is powerful because of the political elite and the state system. Plain is marginalized and poor, although despite its exposed to infrastructures and development in India. So politically, the plain seems to be still in a marginalized situation. But recent times, a lot of people from plain areas have started going to Gulf areas. One of the highest remittance receiving district in Nepal is Dhanusha district, which adjoins the Darbhanga and Motihari in India. Many people, and especially the attractions of the, I should not be bringing the caste class character here, but many people from the plains are attracted to go to. Earlier, they used to go to Punjab for agriculture, harvestings, and other things, seasonal. Now, people from Dhanusha, Rohtahar, Bara, Parsa, and Rupandehi, all these people go to Gulf, and especially the Muslim communities have found way out in the Islamic countries, Gulf countries for that matter. It's much easier for them in terms of cultural issues, but they also face this various discrimination, although they come from the similar religion that practiced in the Gulf areas. But because of the economy, they also feel discrimination. Hill is always powerful, but a lot of research on the Hill. And another lacuna that we find from the Nepal migration study perspective is that there are very little research done on the plains. And I think that there would be some of you may be interested in a future research. I think adjoining border areas of Bihar and Nepal could be very important. How cultural communities, linguistic communities, in terms of what kind of messaging goes across the border in terms of opportunities, going abroad or going in different places within the India. For example, we hear a lot about this Chhat. I think the Nepali Eastern Tarai people also celebrate Chhat. If though they go to Bombay and celebrate Chhat, I think they would also be celebrating together with the people from Bihar, because they speak similar language and cultural framework. There, this Chhat combines this regional identity of Mithilanchal or Purvanchal for that matter. And how does that unfolds in terms of subsistence economic relationship between them, cultural relationship between them. So migration, to some extent, when they leave their places, small town, villages, and they move into the bigger space, region becomes a very important marker of bringing people together. I think this is another dynamics, and that also becomes the cultural resources for them, for survival, and kind of keeping their spirit in a reasonable, their morale and spirit high in terms of working away from home, celebrating festivals together. I could simply, I will imagine that even in a Gulf, a Nepali migrant worker who goes from the Bara Prasar Rohtar would definitely be interacting with the migrant worker going across the border in Indian towns, because they would speak similar language, and that becomes a much more important resources to face the odds and difficulties. Because I have that kind of experience when I traveled to Gulf in the late 90s to meet the migrant workers. They were celebrating all kinds of regional festivals and language music on Friday. When they gathered together, they would sing the similar. They would hear the similar songs, watch similar movies. So there's a cultural dynamics. Whenever we talked about migration, I think too much of an economy, which is important. People go out of home to earn something, because this is a part of the global neoliberal economy. You go, there's a worker, but workers' dignity and pride is also scaffolded by cultural relationship in a difficult, odd times. So I think that's also resources. Language is a resources. Music is a resources. Food is a resources. And I think, yes, no doubt that the people do send their money and keep their national economy, not only their national economy going, but the in Hindi they call घर में चूल्हा भी जलता है, रोटी भी पकता है. The food is prepared at home because they earn and send money. But that also cultural reproductions, what kind of cultural reproduction goes into migrant world is also very important areas that we cannot ignore. So I think this is a broad 3 articles that I share with you. The Yamanaka article talks about who goes where. And again, there's also who afford to go to Japan and Korea and US, who afford to go to Gulf, who afford to go to Bombay or Delhi is a kind. It's based on what you call their status in the society, their resources in the society, and through that, what kind of political influence and cultural reproduction they do is very important area to watch. So I think I have spoken for half an hour, so I will stop here. And because a long distance conversation, I find if it would have been a hall, physical, we could have interacted. I could see you smiling, nodding, or disagreeing with me. But in this Zoom setting, human interaction is not much there. But we need to try best of our ability to do that. I stop here. CRG is my second home, and I always feel good when I come back. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Sharma, for this lecture. If the participants have any questions, they are welcome to let us know, and we'll forward questions to Professor Sharma.
I have a question, Anand, if you allow me.
Yes,
Who is this?
This is Shamota.
Oh, Samota, you are in the top.
Hi, Professor Sharma. Thank you for this lecture. But also, I am so grateful because when we were discussing the people we were going to invite, you were one of the first 3 people we thought of. And I'm so glad that despite so many inconveniences, you agreed to give us this lecture, and really, really grateful. But that is not my question. My question takes off from your comment about the change in the established kinds of families that we've seen so far with the increase in migration. So you told us about how men migrate, after men migrate and send a certain kind of remittance home. Often we find that more larger families are disintegrating, and we find that nuclear family setups are becoming more and more predominant. And in some other instances, you also gave us examples of how there are instances of a higher rate of divorce when the male migrant workers return home. I have something that may be a corollary to this. So do you find any kind of, let's say, a change in the position of women who are the wives or partners of male migrant workers? Is there increased, let's say, empowerment in some senses, because they are probably in decision-making capacities, or they are also in some senses setting up other kinds of families which are not traditionally available? So that is more or less the question that I have. Thank you.
Samata, very interesting question, and this is the kind of issue has been started surfacing it. So precisely because if let's imagine, and I think it's a typical example. This is not a fact-based thing, but when I read and hear a lot of stories coming in, I also pinch myself. Is it that happening? And again, I think when men go out, basically, it's a male-dominated world. One has to agree that the women are also going to the caregiving industries, like the caring of the elderly, nursing homes and other things. Basically, in Israel, there's an agreement with the government of Nepal that they would only employ women for the care home. There are male also going for agriculture work, and then I have known some of the extended, not my family members, from my villages, a female wage earner, been there for the last 10, 15 years and doing fantastically well, and in terms of sending money and raising children and going to the schools and other things. And there are also a lot of changes that is coming in the family structures also. One is that ours is a very patriarchal society, very controlled, male-female relationship. Men have always gone abroad seen as a bread earner, which is a traditional way of looking at. But things are changing in a way. For example, because earlier the joint family used to be very important. For example, who is the inheritor whenever something happens to the men who have gone outside the work? For example, in the case of accident and death, then suddenly the bank would require that the recipient of such a unfortunate, it's a very important but unfortunate, if somebody dies and then you get a compensation for that, it goes to the wife. It's a legal arrangement. And then if the money comes in, then what happens? The other family members, especially the in-laws, say that we all lost our son, but money goes to the women. There's a family tension coming in. The other thing is that if you open a bank account and before going to the Gulf or somewhere, you said that the custodian of my money or my local thing is that my wife would be there. And suddenly family structure, they come for 2-3 months and suddenly it's something like a Hindi movie. You get a child and then father has an obligation to raise the child and money goes directly to that woman and children. And other family members feels that he went there, he's sending money, he's directly to the wife, because women folks are also started learning, doing signatures, opening bank accounts because of the education sort of thing. So there is already a tensions, and then the in-laws, there's the infighting, and when the men come from the Gulf or somewhere, wife is already moved into a semi-urban space in the name of giving good education to children. So that's one kind of example that I'm setting. Other is that once the men goes and then money comes in, they invest into something, open a small tea shop or a handicraft shop or something like that, and women become more independent because relationship is men and husband and wife is more important than anybody else. And because of the sudden realization that I have a money, my husband sends it, but he doesn't come for 3 years. They also develop a kind of business relationship, cultural relationship, and I think the family, very parochial family structures, say that the husband is away and our wife is doing a business and going around for something like that, and it becomes very difficult for a woman to be there. And sometimes the conmen and a lot of stories saying that. For example, the last week, I read in the newspaper that husband sent the money, and then the women gave money to somebody to buy land in the semi-urban space, and the land was tricked. And suddenly, when husband came in, neither money is there, and that the woman was also in a difficult situation because she could not produce the land. So these are tricky issues coming in. There's so many issues. You can't be generalizable. That's why I'm saying that how do we look into the family relationship, men and women relationship? What kind of conjugal relationship, long distance conjugal relationship? What kind of communication goes in between them? There are plenty of a social relationship tension coming in. Money is only one part. We always look remittance, keep family alive, that is a very important, but there's an everyday tension of a relationship. How do you maintain long distance relationship? Do you marry for a conjugal relationship or do you marry for the livelihood? That becomes a very important question. The women are finding difficult because of the relationship, bodily relationship, conjugal relationship is not there. 3 years, 4 years, waiting for somebody and that to be in question. I think there is some element from the women's side of desire, care, family, and that has been changing. This is what I'm saying. It's a very difficult. I'm not the student of the relationship and these things, but as an observer, I whenever turn a newspaper, what kind of things are emerging, and I could see that. And so I was talking to the district judge the other day, what kind of cases you are getting these days, and he was telling me that earlier it was domestic violence. Since menfolk has gone, domestic violence is increasing from the in-laws. But at the same time, when men comes back, he doesn't find his wife because of the conjugal distance relationship, and families are also facing the trouble. So different kinds of issues are coming, and you need empirical evidences. You need everyday form how it is happening and how do you want to address. So I think research, social science is very important, even to address public policy issues, legal issues. You simply, because you like this, you don't like this. Some stories are important, some stories are not important, does not help anything. It may help you to write a novel or a story or a poem for that matter, but for a public policy, legal interventions, you need to have enough empirical evidences, and has to be, law is always about the generalizations. That's what I'm saying. So we are not at the stage of generalizability, but we could see these trends emerging, and it's a very important area for social scientists to contribute and look into it. This is what I was saying, because I was talking to people who are teaching, wanted to do research, and I think I just wanted to trigger that thinking on that. Thank you very much. I want to see the early questions. Sonali, religion may be one of the reasons for easy mobility of people between India and Nepal. I think religion is a very tricky issue. Uh, uh, at one level, I could see I could make some sense, or I could agree with what you have said there. Because of Hinduism, Hindu religion, people travel easily, and similarly, the people from Muslim community, Islam, Muslim community, when they go to Gulf, I think they also have the kind of easy acceptability and sim. But no, class is also very important issue here. I remember some time back in the around 2000, a lot of Bangladeshis went to Malaysia. And Islam, a great egalitarian religion for that matter, place of worship, the place of where you go and pray, offer your namaz, is open to everyone. But suddenly, the rich Malaysians, or Malaysian which they think themselves different from migrant workers, praying together in a namaz, the same place, created a lot of social tension. And for 2 years, Malaysian government, it was around 2000, Malaysian government restricted the Bangladeshi migrant workers. And they offer Nepalese, the migrant workers, because they were not crowding the space, a place, social space. In Gulf areas, Nepali Muslims are not given holidays on Friday to offer the namaz. Because whenever you say I'm a Nepali, but you don't say I'm a Muslim there, what you say that I'm a Nepali, and the contractor and employers said that everybody from Nepal must be of another category than the Muslim category. And there was an intense, negotiation between employers and employee, and then the embassy of Nepal has to intervene that you have to let the Muslim brothers and sisters who have gone to work there on Friday to offer them. Sometimes, state documents, it's a blanket generalizability that the people from Nepal is a multicultural, multi-religious country. It's a secular by the constitution. How secular is pretty difficult in our subcontinent to talk about, but, so I think religion is an important factor. I think, whenever you go migration, migrant work situations, I think it's a class that matter. It's an outsider that defines your categories, and what kind of level you bring in terms of your skills. If you are working in a white collar job, banking sector, I don't think there will be much of a otherness. There will be otherness. Migrant workers are always migrant. It takes a long way to eradicate that line. So religion is very important category, but I believe more on an economic category, cultural category, and the migrant as a other. Therefore, we don't find, and then unfortunately, many of our people go to places where labor laws, cultural practices are not, of that mark. In Korea, in Japan, there is some element of the trade union representation, but in a Gulf, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, even in Malaysia, trade unions' rights are not recognized. Therefore, migrant worker is always seen other, which is inferior because of their poor, poverty, They come to our places, and they are dispensable. I think that's the issue there.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I think we have another question in the chat box.
Yes, Rafiqullah. What is the socio-economic composition profiles of the people who migrate, whether to India or Gulf countries, on the basis of religion? I think all kinds of people from different states of religion migrate. Earlier, the Muslim population were, because of their educations and other things, were not, but there are a lot of opportunities coming in. So all caste, class. Earlier, it was only hill people because of the martial category. The Nepalese are brave, Bahadur, the language they use. Bahadur, brave. Therefore, they used to migrate and recruited into, still in the British Army, Indian Army, Indian Police, Border Security Force, ITP. They are there, and then even in India, in the various communities, I think the hill people are on security guards, the various service industries. The people from other religions, especially Islam, go to Malaysia and Gulf countries, but that too has started recently, because in order to go out, you need to have bit of resources and money to pay the recruiting agent, come to Kathmandu, and because it's a very exploitative world, you need to have some resources. I think when we say the migrant worker who go to these countries are not the poorest of the poor. They need to have information. Is also a social strata. You need a connection. You need to be able to pay something. In a way, you need to be able to see it, in a way or others. You need to have a resources to manage. And many people, while going out, fall into debt trapped also. So in that matter, people say that the poor go to these areas abroad, but in India, I think seasonal migration is a poorest of poor. In basically in Simla, in Garhwal, that area, in apple picking season, I think one of the poorest of poor from that far eastern region go to there. It's a kind of picking up apples. Porters, when come May, June, the Uttarakhand, especially Badri Kedar opens, you find hundreds of Nepalis from that particular area of hills to go as a porter, pony drive, carrying the pony, carrying the loads up in the hills. So these are seasonal poorest of poor. They are not covered by social security. They are not covered by the contract between employee agents and the other things. They are not governed by the state relations. So people who cross the border to India, because we don't require a visa, and work in a what you call menial jobs or the railway station cleaning or various kinds of work, which many people don't do. So a lot of child labor also flee to India to do work in restaurants and dhabas, roadside dhabas, in transport truck business. You could see the young lad hanging and helping they call Guruji, the driver. And so I think all kinds of people is basically economic drivers, economic categories is important. You mentioned Myanmar as a sizable Nepali-speaking population. Do you think religion affiliation is one of the contributing factors in the same? I think Myanmar is a tricky question. Around 300,000 Nepali-speaking people there at the moment. I've visited a couple of times. They also would like to call them Gorkhas there. Because if in a census, if you put Nepali category and speak Nepali, language category, not in the ethnic category, then Nepali becomes Nepali. If you say that I speak Nepali in a census category, then Nepali is speaking people as a homeland, that's called Nepal. So because of their demographic politics, Nepalese can always be chased out of the Myanmar, because people who went to Myanmar, basically they are pre-Second World War. When British Empire was there, it was easy to go from Calcutta in the steamers or from northeast. A lot of northern area of Myanmar, Memyo, Mandalay. These are the areas where you have a Nepali migrant. The earlier Nepali settlers. I don't call them migrant now. They are settlers. But slowly they have started keeping two names. One is a Myanmari name. The other is a household Nepali name. So, and then they don't want to call themselves as Nepali in a census, Nepali speaking, because you have a homeland and you can be chased out. So it's a language politics that plays a very important role. And there are sizable numbers of a floating Nepali population in a Thai-Burma border. In a Bangkok, you'll find a lot of Nepalis who do not want it to be because of the various instability in Myanmar. They have moved. And then earlier there used to be sizable number in the police and army, but the Burman majority wanted to chase every minority out. Therefore, you don't find many Nepalis they don't want to call themselves Nepali. But in terms of religion, Buddhism is a dominant religion in Myanmar. But teaching language school always have a Hindu temples there. So very interesting. People have all kinds of strategies to beat the hegemonic political relationship. It's a kind of resistance from below. There are different ways, permutations and combinations, different strategies that the minorities use. What the James Scott called hidden transcript of resistance. So in Myanmar, I could see that. Language schools, bhajan means people singing hymns in the evenings, Ramayana Mandali. This is how they started keeping their trend. So, but people in Myanmar went together with the British Empire in the 1920s and 30s and left behind. Thank you very much. That's the Myanmar issue. And Myanmari Nepalis are not considered migrant workers. They're diasporic Nepali.
Thank you, sir. Actually, so one question came in my mind is that given our colonial legacy, Nepal and India and South Asia as a geographical location, this very stereotyping or even the perception about a Nepali and a Gorkha performing a certain kind of role in the, we were talking about kind of role which is assigned to them. Is it something which is coming as a result of the stereotyping that it gets constantly reinforced in the market and that it has become a certain kind of acceptance that this is what they will continue in terms of their profession? Or is it something which they are doing it consciously and, they do not want to break out of that? First, that is the question.
I think it's a very, very important question, how identities are constructed, reinforced by convenience, process, at the same time convenience also, easy convenience. For example, I've been, many friends in Calcutta Research Group know me that I travel fairly well in India. I studied in India, Chandigarh. I was a political activist, exiled in India. Whenever I crossed the border, even in Delhi, the passport officers looks at my passport and says that, Sharma, if you understand Hindi, and there are many people, I'll translate. Sharma, Nepal mein bhi Sharma hote hain. Do they have Sharma in Nepal? You don't look like Sharma. You don't look like a Nepali. They also stereotype. And one point of time, sorry, these are very racial and culturally sensitive, but this is a classroom. By the way of example, I'm bringing this, not wanted to demean anybody. I have crossed hundreds of times the Delhi airport. And some of those, when I studied in India, were coming and going various times. And at one point of time, the similar came, and sorry, it was some Haryanvi in Delhi airport. Hey, Sarmaji, tum to Nepali nahi lagte. He was telling me. Then I saw somebody from Northeast, and I knew him because we were traveling together. And I said, Would you come here, please? Is he look like Nepali? Then the northeastern friend of mine said that, these are all the North Indian, mindset. I'm a Manipuri, I'm an Indian. Look at by looking at your face, your features, we all stereotype. Even the passport official, there need to be a great training. You have to look into document. Anybody could be, have any origin, but it is the document what he says. And again, there's a big tension that somebody looking at my face, stereotypes, categorize. But in recent times, what we have been arguing that the identities are best described as a self-assertion, especially on a sexual minority or sexual preferences. Whether you'd like to be described as a male and female, it's up to your autonomy. We have reached at that level of, describing your own or what you wanted to be called. And these days I get a lot of, males saying that falla, he or she, or he or her, or they. Look at this. We have at one stage, we have reached to that level of, individual identity and autonomy. On the same time, the passport officials don't look into your passports and document and says that you are not from that place or that place. So this stereotype takes long time to go. For example, I said, all Nepalese at some place, sometimes it looks good, but you say, Are Bahadur, any Nepali or any Gorkhali for that matter, passing through the streets of Patiala or Mumbai, Calcutta is much liberal in that sense. I haven't seen that. But I could see that, oh Daju, oh Dai, not brother. But the O means, something like a Modi said, O Didi type, So it's always a very, very, very difficult, it takes long way. So our societies are not tolerant societies. Our societies we are always fearful of other. It's a most, one of the most difficult philosophical and personal thing is that we all confront with the dilemma that how do we best understand other? Your wife, your children, your family, your society, the other than you is always problematic. And I think a lot of tensions, theoretical tensions, practical tensions come from understanding other. And migrant worker for that matter, or foreigner for that matter, is always a other, which is very difficult to describe. And an easy marker that is available to you is a stereotyping. And in order to escape that stereotyping, I think the classrooms, the discussions, the writings, and the most importantly, the stereotyping in our modern time have been the contemporary media and cinemas. In any cinemas you look into it, and I think that will be more frequent in coming days. Because of the Afghanistan issues, there will be a lot of tensions that we will be witnessing in the subcontinent in days to come. Basically, idea of terrorism, fundamentalism, and all kind of things. And mark my word today, Indian media will suddenly create a hype that the linkages of this kind of activities is in Nepal. We are poor, vulnerable. India's irritants, dominant majority communities' irritants or states' irritants will be on a poor, marginal country. Similarly, in a society also, if something happens, that old lady with one eye must have a black magic, that kind of thing. We always look into somebody who is different, somebody who is vulnerable, somebody who is not part of you as a troublemakers in our society. I think it's a long way to go to address or bring in the compassion and understanding of our differences. Okay, so looking at the migrant worker, as I said, at one point I thank Modi because of one stroke, he brought millions of individuals into our discussions and we started recognizing them. But still, that is not enough. In a migration, there is always a pull and push factor. Those who go to overseas for some opportunity is basically a pull factor. the type of the migration you were talking about in a Kashmiri situations is a push factor. It creates the displacement, basically. People escape for a various reason. People escape for a various reason, for a better opportunities, for livelihood, and for a safety also. If you can't walk on your street, you can't go and play on the grounds that you have been playing since your childhood. Your own backyard and front yard become the alien place because of the external presence, be it a security forces, be it a somebody else coming in. Then what you do? It's a natural instinct. Either you fight or exit. I think exit is one of the major strategies that we have seen people in a vulnerable situation. Very few people, and fighting requires a lot of other resources also. Exit is a flick of a decision. You move away. Exit is also very difficult proposition in terms of your dealing from your family, your societies, your cultural frame, moorings and everything, but still individual survival is important. And I, as someone who has walked on and off in Afghanistan for 3 years, in around 2006-07, I can't imagine how people can go. And someone who has also spent a couple of months or about a year in exile in India, leaving your families, leaving your personal belongings, your marker of everyday life. When you go out of the street, you see the tree, you see the person, passing by every day to pick up a milk or something or newspaper one, and suddenly you are devoid of your life markers around you, and you have to leave that place for an unknown place, and then life becomes miserable. I think people do go out for the search of livelihood. That's what political economy pushes us to do. But I think living amidst the forced displacement is the most painful displacement. In this last 6 months, I have personally witnessed my own dear friends from Myanmar who have been pushed out, not of their choice, because they could not compromise their professional integration, integrity, political belief, commitment to democracy. Some of them are in a Manipur border, some are moving around in the Thailands, and some of them, even if they reach to US for asylum, someone who was a regional director with a social standing in Myanmar of a big international operation is finding difficult to survive. And he was telling me other day that, Ari, I miss rice. Ari, I miss the aromatic pakoras and other things. And it's very painful. Similarly, Afghani colleagues who have been forced out of Afghanistan. Now people are valorizing, saying that it's a very heroic act to rescue. It's fine, you have to save lives. But what goes inside to the mother who has been throwing her child to the American soldier? It's a very painful time. So it's a pushed factor. Afghans don't want to leave their home. They've been leaving their home for so many years, 40, 50 years. And I wonder why one has to push out of their places. So it's a very difficult time for all of us around the subcontinent. In a short span of 6 months, we see people from Myanmar evicted out, those who wanted to work and contribute in Myanmar. Afghanistan, bigger geopolitical forces played, bigger political forces played and took their destiny out of their hand. So it's a very difficult time. Sorry, I was kind of distracted by the current events, which I wanted to share with you. Living in a Kathmandu, not going out of home for 18 months. It's very nice to see you, my colleagues and friends. Sabbe is there watching me, and Pauladi was also there. Shamata is there. So very happy to see you all. And it would have been great that I could see all of this cohort of this course laughing, arguing, having tea, coffee together would have been a great thing. But unfortunately, we have to contain what we have today. Thank you very much.
Sir, if we can take one more question, I think Joy has written down a question in the chat box about migration between Nepal and China.
Okay, there is a very little migration, no migration whatsoever. It's restricted. People can go for work, very controlled, restricted. I think there are a number of people who go to China for a work, basically technical people. But with the Tibet, historically, there was people crossing the border. The politically correct would be autonomous region of China, Tibet, a historical relationship. Border is basically open for the people living on both sides of the border, 50 kilometers. They can go with a pasture during the the snow season. They can come to south and go. But of recently this has been closed for last 10 years because of the Chinese are very sensitive about Tibet. But historically, people have been coming and going, and they didn't require, only permit was required. But with the opening of China, especially Tibet, a lot of Nepali restaurant workers basically cook and others because Kathmandu has a very, because it was always on a crossroad, and 60s it was much more open place, 70s the restaurant business. So in a Lhasa, if you walk around the Bakhor, which is a central Lhasa, I know the geography of Lhasa because I've been there for many times. So you find every restaurant has some Nepali cook or others, right? Plus, in recent years, when China was opening to work with its soft power, there are around 350 students studying engineering, and around 500 students medical sciences. So around 1,000 students there, and plus here and there. So you have at any point of time around 5,000 Nepalese coming and going to China. It's a very restricted environment, but something is there. But as a migrations, automatic is not there. Chinese are very restrictive in their visa policies, and if they find a little bit of a relationship with the Tibetan things, they automatically arrest you and deport you back.
Thank you very much, sir. We are approaching 8 o'clock. I think we can close the question and answer session if there aren't any other questions. Thank you, sir, once again for all the reading materials you shared. They have been distributed to the participants. Thank you for your lecture, and thank you for also for answering these questions in such detail. Samantha, would you like to say something before we close?
No, I just want to thank Professor Hari Sharma for this very, I don't know how to term this lecture, because the ease with which you travel from particular stories to questions and concerns which are central to our understanding of migration and forced migration, it is remarkable, and it's something we really, each of us need to learn from. I am really happy with this lecture. So thank you so much. And thank you to the participants for making it through the penultimate week of our course. We end next week. We have 2 classes on.
Congratulations. Congratulations to everyone.
So next Saturday, we have 2 classes. There are classes on historiography. Professor Subhash Ranjan Chakraborty will talk about migration and Black Death. And Anisha Sengupta will talk about the partition of the Indian subcontinent. And in the final class, on 29th, we will have Ranu Basu talking about migrant children's education. So yeah, we look forward to the next week. And thank you so much once again, Professor Sharma, for speaking to us and giving us your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And it's good to see all of you. Good luck. Enduring Zoom for 2 hours every week, around 4 hours, is a great achievement. Thank you very much.